Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Really excited for this day. We've been building to it for a little while. We are excited to announce that we are preparing for the second Four Corners Coalition campaign. If you've been following our work over the past year, you might be familiar with the fact that early this year, Flagstaff, Boulder, Santa Fe, and Salt Lake City all came together and announced intentions to fund projects around the theme of carbon dioxide removal and concrete. And we ultimately ended up distributing about $389,000 in catalytic grants to 4 different projects. And those projects they're happening now. We had an opportunity to go visit 2 of them yesterday. We also have a project in Durango and in Flagstaff, and we're just very excited about that. And so we're back, and we're kind of following our playbook from before. We've been working with the same 4 communities, and we are now very excited to be bringing on Albuquerque and Bernalillo County in New Mexico for a second campaign. And we are wanting to explore the theme of carbon removal and liability biomass, which I will unpack a little bit here in the deck. But this is sort of, we call it an opportunity to notice and a request for comments. We kind of feel like we're 90% there. We've been doing engagement with the communities, engagement with political leaders, with the residents, and we like this theme. We're excited about this theme, but we want to be able to communicate with you all, suppliers in the CDR world, people that are thinking about creative ways to deal with liability biomass before we sort of like lock in the parameters of our campaign. And so I'll review timeline, I'll review a lot of things during this, but we're sort of opening up this period for comments and requesting information from you all with an intention to sort of solidify things in probably early 2024 when we will officially be asking for proposals. So that's sort of the big picture idea of what's going on today. So this is my agenda slide. I'll refer to it a couple of times. It'll pop up. We'll do a bit of a welcome, kind of a short discussion on carbon dioxide removal. I know most of this audience is pretty hip to that. And if there are people that are watching a recording later, we'll point to some resources. And then just talk about the Four Corners Carbon Coalition, sort of how it came to be a little bit, but also how it's growing and this sort of structure of how we come to campaigns and trying to solicit proposals to receive catalytic grant funding. We'll talk about liability biomass as a theme and some of the things that we're already thinking about, some of the things that are on our radar, with an acknowledgement that perhaps there are things we're not thinking about. And that's one of the things we're really excited about, is to see solutions that suppliers might be able to bring to the table that aren't even on our radar yet. It will actually be sort of near the end when I will invite the partner communities to come off mute and introduce themselves and to talk a little bit about the liability biomass landscape or situation in their communities, if they're interested in doing that, and maybe some of the project types that they're interested in. We will provide quite a few resources, including a link to our initial application and a link to a Google form so that people can get in touch with us, and we can spend the next 2 months really kind of going from that 90% ready to 100% ready to launch. And there'll also be some time for a question and answer. Great. So carbon dioxide removal, like I said, we'll keep this part short. But what is it? We like to emphasize that it is activities that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and durably store it in geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoirs or in products. We do try to make sure that we spend a little bit of time emphasizing what it is not. Carbon dioxide removal is different than carbon capture. Carbon capture you can often think of as being point source, so smokestacks and things of that nature, where there's a point source emitting into the atmosphere. That is fundamentally not carbon removal. That is a reduction, and may or may not be a good climate solution depending on the context. But one thing it is not is carbon removal. Carbon removal is also not a substitute for rapid emissions reductions. We have also got communities that are certainly needing to invest resources in adaptation to climate change that's already somewhat baked in. This is not saying that we can, ignore any of those things. It is sort of a new pillar here. Perhaps the most utilized metaphor in carbon removal is the bathtub metaphor. You can see the emissions faucet that is blasting and the drain that is trickling. And so clearly it is more effective to turn off that emissions faucet. That is important. We also need to support those drains. But as mentioned, it is not a substitute. It must be both. And so we like to emphasize this idea that we need to be pursuing both simultaneously and in parallel. Carbon dioxide removal is now necessary, but it is certainly not sufficient to avoiding the worst impacts of climate change. It needs to be a both and. It's not a zero sum. So distraction not welcome. And as I mentioned, it's carbon removal is now a necessary pillar of climate action. So we've got reductions, we've got adaptations. Removal now needs to be a part of the conversation. We're really excited that a lot of local governments, as well as national governments, are starting to talk about removal. It is sort of newer on the stage, but it is clearly a necessary part of it. You can see here, the IPCC panel on climate change. Every report that is coming out, it is becoming increasingly clear. By mid-century, we're going to need to have significant, perhaps even gigaton scale of carbon removal. And we're not going to be able to just sort of flip the switch at that point. So, here we are in the 2020s. It is necessary to get sort of the ball rolling so that it has time to scale to where we need. At the same time, though, those emissions reductions must happen, or getting to scale still won't be sufficient. This is an image of quite a few carbon dioxide pathways that are often discussed. You'll see that all of them start in the sort of air or in the atmosphere with drawdown, figuring out sort of where to put it. And so there can be, certainly nature-based solutions, but there's also getting carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and figuring out how to durably store it in geologic formations, either above ground or below ground. Certainly there is an increasing number of solutions that are thinking about ocean-based solutions and other things, but we just like to highlight this to demonstrate some of the pathways that are being explored. And if you are interested, if you're seeing a recording later, this is a handful of resources. There's quite a few out there. I'm highlighting actually the carbon removal in the Hudson Valley campaign because Chris Neidl gave what I think might be the 17 best minutes of introduction to carbon removal and thinking about some of the things related to technology versus nature and other things of that nature that are part of the carbon dioxide removal discussion right now. So that would be an excellent one. OpenAir also has just an incredible growing library. This is CDR presentations. I think this slide might be old. It's saying 70 plus episodes. There may be 80 or 90 at this point, but highlighting companies and solutions and researchers and thinkers all in the space of CDR. And the FAQ actually will go to our website at Four Corners Carbon, which will also reference a lot of links and resources. Great. So once again, the agenda, we're going to go into the Four Corners Carbon Coalition piece next. And so this is actually from one of our decks about the Four Corners Carbon Coalition. It was started in 2021, initially with the City of Flagstaff and Boulder County. And they got together after a matchmaker and OpenAir kind of made introductions because both communities were talking about carbon removal in their communities with their leadership for different reasons, and they both kind of have their own stories. But they came together sort of with this vision, recognizing that carbon dioxide removal, we need more and sustained developments to happen this decade, and that local governments and communities could be absolutely key to making them happen. For carbon removal to achieve that sort of necessary mid-century scale, there's this belief amongst the participating communities that promising projects must start to be rapidly actualized pretty much at any scale. We are excited about small projects, we're excited about big projects, but we need to start helping communities and residents understand the menu of options. We like to use this menu metaphor because sometimes carbon removal, it's only seen as one sort of thing, but when you do engagement and education with the communities, there's quite a few different things. But there's this sense that menu must be developed, and it needs the solutions that are on that menu. They need this multi-decade runway to be able to benefit from deployment-led iterations, not just research in the lab, but as well as improvements, rejections, and cost reductions, certainly. If you pay attention to carbon removal in the news, you may hear about Stripe and Microsoft and Shopify and Frontier. And certainly there are early actors in the corporate space that are making investments in carbon removal. You might think of them as sort of the innovators, but we think of local communities as being sort of like ready to take on that baton and to be able to determine, amongst themselves, what are some of the projects that they're interested in, to invite them into the community. Communities, there's thousands of them, certainly, and it's really a bridge. Local communities could be the bridge in terms of making sure that there's participation and support and iteration. And we really think that it's a bridge asking to be built. Well, I went a little too far. That it is a bridge asking to be built. There are over 2,300 jurisdictions worldwide that have made formal climate emergency declarations. The Net Zero Tracker highlights over 250 local governments that have adopted policies or made pledges to achieve carbon neutrality. And carbon neutrality fundamentally is a framework that's going to require discussions around carbon dioxide removal, because we know that in short time frames, no communities are going to be able to decarbonize all the way to zero. If you're talking carbon neutrality, there's going to have to be a conversation about carbon removal. And the asterisk here of 250 local governments is because this tracker does not include any communities that have populations of less than 500,000. And Flagstaff actually is a community of about 70,000 that has a goal of carbon neutrality. So we're not on that tracker. And so I don't know exactly how many communities it is, but it is a tremendous number. And so what Four Corners aims to do is to engage with communities and to expand understanding, imagination, and ultimately acceptance of carbon removal by actualizing locally initiated projects. I think there can be this sense, as I alluded to before, that communities may look at carbon removal and it's sort of this black box. It's a thing that's not necessarily well understood. I spent 3 years in a sustainability office, and sustainability offices, carbon removal wasn't a part of the conversation 4 years ago. It's only starting to become a part of the conversation. And when communities are looking out and saying, like, what can we do in the carbon removal space? We believe that having exemplar communities that are actually sort of like, putting steel in the ground, actualizing projects, that's a way to be able to show other communities what it is and to sort of turn that black box into something that is better understood and better accepted. It's also an approach by working with communities to have projects sort of invited into communities. There's certainly a lot of I guess you could say, fear, uncertainty, and doubt around carbon removal. There's this sense that it might be this thing that just sort of descends upon communities and is imposed upon them. And that can cause a little bit of heartburn, certainly. And so the Four Corners model aims to do that engagement with the local leaders, with the local residents, to come up with themes and figure out, well, what is it that you would be excited to sort of like broadcast and say, we're interested in something. Show us what you got. In order to, and that kind of really greases the wheels for this concept of consent-based siting. So rather than something that is just imposed upon, and project developers are like, this is a great idea and you love it, right? It's actually kind of locally initiated, and it's the local communities that are saying, this is what we're interested in, this is why it resonates with us. It's a theme that we can get behind, and it's an easier sort of path to actualization. And local governments have done this before. There's quite a few case studies, but we often refer back to solar energy. In the early 2000s, the federal government was putting out federal policies like the investment tax credit, production tax credit, similar to what the federal government is doing right now, whether it's with 45Q or some of the hubs that people may have heard about, the Inflation Reduction Act. The federal government is starting to pump out some policies and incentives. And it was local governments that really figured out how to deploy, how to act on those. It was public school districts and municipal entities that were the first ones to actually put into action power purchase agreements and be the off-takers, really sort of unlocking this idea of commercial scale solar, because prior to that, it was really just utility scale solar that was possible. And if you look at solar today, it continues to be, there's these big central projects, but it's also a significant portion that is, smaller and moderate sized, distributed installations. And today, there continues to be a meaningful capacity around 30% that are not those utility scale projects. And so we believe that that is likely a path that carbon dioxide removal is going to be following. Developing that menu mix of centralized as well as distributed projects that can be, perhaps somewhere out in like a centralized location, but it can also be incredibly distributed with a lot of communities, and that it be the local communities that are leading the way, actualizing projects, going through the permitting processes, right? A lot of these projects, they're going to have to go through local government. And so having local governments at the table and sort of saying, this is the project that we want, can be very powerful. Local governments really pioneering the development and implementation of tools, and that these deployments will really lead to that sort of deployment-led innovation. So much of what it brought the cost of solar down was those deployment-led innovations, right? Learning from doing. And so, we're all while doing this is all while bringing an emergent sector and service into communities and allowing it to feel that tangible and familiar, to be seen as demonstrably beneficial. We've got our little cartoon here where, communities are now looking at carbon removal and it's no longer a black box. It's not so weird. They're talking to each other saying, we could do that, we should do that. There still may be a little bit of a how, and our model is doing it together. And so Four Corners aims to kind of serve two functions, to do a lot of engagement and education, as already mentioned, but also to then work with the communities that we're doing engagement with to try to arrive at a point where we're ready to launch a campaign around a theme, and to say to the CDR suppliers of the world, this is what we're interested in. We've got some resources to try to close the gap. If there's a reason that a project isn't able to happen, in our region and in our communities, let's have a conversation, tell us what it is, and let's try to get something on the ground. And again, we sometimes use so this is our Four Corners sort of approach. We've already done sort of A and B, and we're getting ready to move on to C and D here, but we've formed our partnerships with our 6 communities here. We've selected this sort of theme, this local focus of liability biomass that I'll unpack in a moment. And we're sort of in this between B and C. We're getting ready to ask for proposals, but we want to hear from you all first. Again, kind of showing our homework a little bit, but asking you to help us bring it to the 100% line. And then ultimately, after awarding sort of anchor funding for projects, one of the things that we strive to do with all of the partners that we bring into sort of our portfolio is to work together to continue to do engagement with the communities and to try to multiply the impact of the projects. We don't necessarily want it to just be sort of that one-time grant, but we want to work together to continue to get the good work that the partners and the companies that we're working with to be able to do more. And so, there's a couple different ways that we can kind of imagine this aggregated campaigns. Again, borrowing from solar, there can be this idea of a distributed site model, sometimes thought of as solarized, but you can get a handful of communities that are all saying, like, we want this same thing. We're all working together on this same campaign, and what we ultimately want are projects that are sited in our communities. So it is sort of this pooling of resources, and we may not get 6 projects, one in each community. We may, end up getting, fewer than that, perhaps more than that. But this is sort of the model where everyone's kind of excited at moving in this direction and sort of recognizing that developing this competency, developing, this sort of sector in our region will have a lot of benefit. And so, as previously mentioned, our first campaign we ran with these 4 communities. The theme was around carbon removal and concrete. And so this was sort of selecting that local focus. We did award over $389,000 in catalytic grants to 4 projects. This is an example of 3 of those projects. And so we're kind of at the step C here where we awarded projects. When this deck becomes live, you'd be able to click on it. But in March or April, we hosted sort of our awardee showcase event. And we're just really proud of all of the work that our partners are doing in that concrete space. And so companies that sort of come on board for this biomass, liability biomass themed campaign, we would expect very similar things to happen, where after the award is made, we would want to showcase what are the projects and to get the word out. And, it's not just hosting webinars on YouTube, but we're getting a lot of attention. It's a very exciting, by partnering and being a part of one of our campaigns, we've been getting a fair bit of news coverage, and we think of this as being a part of the impact expansion, being able to tell the story of locally initiated, locally based carbon removal that's happening. And this is an example of that impact expansion campaign that I mentioned. So, this is one of our projects. It's the one based in Flagstaff. Already an awesome project. We were very excited to have them on board. It was a project at a block facility where Carbon Built was going to help retrofit the facility, essentially swap out a steam curing chamber for a carbon dioxide curing chamber. And then there's going to be 6 modular DAC units on site as well. So essentially those DAC units are going to pull carbon dioxide from the air. That carbon dioxide is going to be the carbon dioxide that is flooding the carbon dioxide curing chamber, and the blocks will themselves mineralize the carbon dioxide into their structure. We loved that project. It was amazing. But then when we started having conversations with all of the partners involved, we found that Carbon Built, and as well as Blocklight, they'd had previous experiences partnering and collaborating with Habitat for Humanity. And so we got Habitat for Humanity from Flagstaff involved. We learned all about their amazing starter home program, which is frankly revolutionizing the way that Habitat does business. And the impact expansion campaign now is that blocks that are produced in the way that I described are going to be donated to the Habitat for Humanity starter homes, and they will go and build the actual foundations of the next. So far, we've raised funds to support the next 25 starter homes, and we're continuing to raise funds for that. So this is just an example of an impact expansion campaign, and just really excited to highlight it and to have potential partners that might be submitting a proposal kind of just get an idea of what it is that we're talking about when we say we want to continue to work with you. It's not just the original grant, but we want to help multiply impact and help you just be more impactful. So this is sort of my deep summary. Our thesis is that carbon dioxide removal needs more participation and support. People need to understand the menus that are available and the diversified portfolios that may be necessary. We've kind of got this, idea that if you demystify and demonstrate, then these locally initiated deployments will follow. They will be invited, not imposed. And the community, by being involved, they can also be a part of setting guardrails, and ultimately advocacy will follow rather than some of that resistance. It's happened before. Local governments were there, local communities were there for solar energy, absolutely critical in it getting to where it is today. We often think of carbon removal as perhaps being where solar was 20 or 30 years ago. Great. So next, moving to the idea of liability biomass. And so we define liability biomass in the context of this campaign as referring to non-merchantable forest residues which tend to accumulate and increase the vulnerability of a landscape or a community to catastrophic wildfire. And in a little bit, you'll hear from the communities, and we're in the Western United States. Catastrophic wildfire is certainly something that affects us significantly. So liability biomass, it's often cited as one of the primary bottlenecks to being able to accomplish forest restoration at the pace and scale that is needed in order to reduce risk and support forest health. We do often want to pause and remember to appreciate the land managers that are out there. We know that it's a hard job. We also want to acknowledge the fact that low intensity broadcast fires and the sort of shift to reintroducing fire to fire adapted landscapes is an absolutely necessary movement. But we talk to land managers and the practice of pile burning and things that are just pure play fuel reduction strategies. That's nobody's favorite thing. It carries some risk. That is not an example of reintroducing sort of this broadcast fire. And those are the types of things that we could be really interested in finding new solutions to, rather than just sort of the pile and burn. And even with the pile and burn strategy that people don't love, we're still not being able to get rid of that liability biomass, again, at the pace and scale necessary to accomplish the forest restoration that is necessary in our regions. And so these are some of the pathways that are already on our radar, with that acknowledgement of the satellite dish down there saying, show us what you got. There could be some things that we're not thinking about. And we'd love to hear from you if you're a supplier that says, hey, I've got a solution that doesn't necessarily fit one of these buckets. But certainly biochar is a conversation that's happening in the Western United States. I think there's a lot of curiosity and interest of being able to take that liability biomass and make an amendment, or even be able to think about ways in which biochar is utilized that's not even necessarily for agriculture or landscaping. We know that biochar is being introduced to concrete. So if you want to connect to our old campaign with concrete, we'd love to hear that as well. Certainly biomass burial is something that we're seeing sort of grow in the Western United States. We're excited about the practice. It seems to have sort of a high efficacy from carbon removal, and could be a really exciting pathway. And then things that are sort of in the BECS or the bikers space. So, if there's something sort of on that bioenergy and carbon capture, or we know bikers is a relatively new term, biomass carbon removal and storage, kind of recognizing that we can, it's a hybrid solution. We can work with nature. It does the atmospheric drawdown, but then, people get involved, and there's intentional human activity, when you're utilizing either technology or just activity, I suppose, to store that carbon and make sure that it stays out of the carbon cycle. So, biology is doing the removal, and then humans are kind of getting involved on the storage side. We borrowed this slide from one of our partners at NREL. We're really excited about the work that they're doing, and that they've got a great cast of companies that are part of their portfolio for investigating some of the knowns and unknowns around bikers. So again, this is that idea of biomass carbon removal and storage. We would be excited about any sort of bikers approach, whether it's this torrefaction or bio oil or burial or things of that nature. We like to kind of put this slide up and say we would be excited to hear from any of those companies. We'd be excited to hear from other companies as well. But we kind of like this one to show what the bikers pathways seem to be. Again, that biochar is something that some of our forest managers are familiar with. They've seen the char bosses and some of the sort of mobile units. There's also interest and excitement in some stationary units, but recognizing that this could be a pathway to be able to deal with some of the bottlenecks and the liability biomass that's happening in our forests. Certainly biomass burial, we know that there's a lot of activity and interest here. On that, this is CDR. We got to see the Yale Carbon Containment Lab in Kodama, and others kind of talk about the efficacy. Certainly, we've seen that biomass that has been buried, we uncover it years later, and it's still intact. And it's a really interesting, exciting solution that I know some education has been happening in communities, and there are some that are interested in that as a possible pathway. This one sort of is a combination of things. We are aware of the issue of orphaned oil and gas wells. In New Mexico alone, there's over 72,000 orphaned oil and gas wells, and those wells, they need to be plugged. And there's interest in using a combination of biochar and concrete to be able to plug those. It's this carbon removal activity that supports necessary remediation. Often in the biochar space, we hear from people saying, well, what are you going to do with the biochar? We would love to see a project and support a project that was able to go in this direction, and to have that in a portfolio. And then again, show us what we got. What have we not mentioned? We've heard from people that are talking about taking that liability biomass and turning it into building materials. That could be something that would be really interesting. It wouldn't be things that would be, traditionally merchantable. If it's able to kind of go to, a sawmill and kind of become lumber, I don't know that would, I'm confident that would not qualify for our campaign. But if you're figuring out how to deal with the non-merchantable and be able to sort of catalyze the removal of these forest residues, then we'd be excited to hear what it is, even if it hasn't already appeared sort of in this deck of some of the things that we're thinking about. Great. And so at this point, I'm actually going to take a moment to stop talking myself, take a sip of coffee, and to invite some of the communities to come off mute to introduce themselves, introduce their community, perhaps talk a little bit about why this theme of liability biomass resonates. And we will do it in the order that you see here on the slide. So community members, you can kind of like think about when you're on deck. We'll start with Boulder County, move to Flagstaff, Salt Lake, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and finally Bernalillo. And I will go ahead and leave sort of that community intro prompt up here for you all. So Susie, I believe you're on the line. If you'd like to come off mute and just kind of introduce Boulder County, history with Four Corners, and why this theme resonates with you.
Yeah, thanks, Ramon. It's good to be here with everybody. My name is Susie Strife. I'm the Director of Climate Action for Boulder County, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Four Corners Carbon Coalition. So very grateful to be here. I mean, I think you've said very clearly what we're after. There's no surprise that on the local government level, we've become the first responders to the climate crisis in our communities. And so, as many of you know, we're not just working on mitigation for the climate crisis, we're also called in for a lot of other immediate response and recovery from climate-related disasters. So we really know firsthand how our communities and our ecosystems are impacted by this crisis. And frankly, Boulder County, among other communities here, has really become quite the epicenter of climate catastrophes, especially as it relates to catastrophic wildfires. So this particular RFP and announcement is very interesting to us as we start to evolve the way we're thinking about what we're doing in our forests and how we can, blend, I guess, resilience with climate mitigation together. Because with limited resources and capacity, a lot of communities that care about climate have to sort of showcase the intersectionality of resilience and community benefits as well as mitigation. So when we're talking about supporting carbon removal projects, we often don't just reduce this to the carbon outcomes. Rather, we focus on kind of the charismatic community co-benefits and ecosystem benefits that draw our communities into the narrative. So I'm just really excited to be here. I'm pumped about the growth of Four Corners and the excitement that what we can do together and pooling our resources, our purchasing power, our policies as communities really has a much bigger impact at scale than what we can do alone in our own designated geographies. So thanks so much, Ramon, and I'll pass it on to the next community.
The next community is actually Flagstaff. So I will speak on behalf of Flagstaff. I worked there for 3 years. Flagstaff is a founding community of the Four Corners Carbon Coalition. And having, living there, I can say that, certainly catastrophic fire has visited our community recently. In the last 5 years, I believe we've had something like 6 significant fires that impacted our community. We kind of have this ready, set, go system. People packing up bags and getting ready to leave. And there was one summer where we had 2 fires that literally crossed paths, the pipeline fire and the museum fire, I believe. And so, we're just, I guess, a prime example of a community where we know that the liability biomass situation in our forests is untenable. The pace and scale of restoration is not happening at the speed that anyone that's involved is satisfied with. And so we're just really excited to see what we can do to help catalyze the pace and scale of that restoration. So, and I think with that, I will pass it over to Peter in Salt Lake City.
Hey, thanks very much, Ramon. Good morning, everyone. Salt Lake City is happy to be here to participate in the Four Corners Opportunity Notice for 2024. My name is Peter Nelson, and I'm with Salt Lake City's Department of Sustainability. And I'm joined here today with several colleagues from our Salt Lake City International Airport, as well as our Public Lands Department. So Salt Lake City joined the Four Corners Carbon Removal Coalition in 2022, and we were happy to participate in the evaluation committee for 2023's carbon removal concrete projects. Salt Lake City loves engaging in Western regional efforts. Just a little about us. Salt Lake City's overarching climate goal for the city is an 80% community-wide reduction in GHG emissions by 2040, with an ambitious 100% renewable electricity supply by 2030 to help get us there. One item to note, though, is that air quality has historically been an important sustainability issue in our region. And this was typically a wintertime concern due to the geography of Salt Lake City Valley, and the cool air that settles in there, a phenomenon called inversion, creates conditions for our vehicle and building emissions to be trapped for days at a time. However, increased wildfire events during the summertime are increasingly turning poor air quality conditions into dual season events for us. 2 summers ago, we hosted an indoor air quality summit to discuss how to protect our indoor spaces from intrusion of hazardous air pollutants, and black carbon was a focus of the discussion amongst the experts there. And so while measures to protect ourselves from poor air quality are important, anything that can reduce the instances of emissions, including mitigating the occurrence of wildfire, is an important resiliency measure, and this Liability Biomass campaign addresses just that. So we're excited to see how this campaign develops this year. Thanks, Ramón.
Thank you, Peter. Neil from Santa Fe, and then we'll have Albuquerque on deck.
Hi, everyone. My name is Neil Denton. I'm the Sustainability Officer with the City of Santa Fe. The City of Santa Fe participated in the initial Four Corners campaign last year. We're very excited to see this focus on liability biomass, just like Flagstaff. We experienced the largest wildfire in the state's history just outside of Santa Fe in the Santa Fe National Forest. Last year, I was one of those people with my bags packed. If anyone on the call is not familiar with Santa Fe, we have a pretty significant wildland urban interface. We do a lot of work in that space, and we mulch all that material at our transfer station, and we have an abundance of that processed biomass. We're working with some interns right now through the University of New Mexico and developing plans to sequester more carbon. And we'd love to see an increase of biochar applications in and around Santa Fe. But very importantly, we'd like to see that orphaned well plugging that Ramón mentioned. With 72,000 orphaned wells in New Mexico, while we're focusing on mitigation and adaptation as much as possible, we've got methane leaking into the air all around us. So that's a particular project proposal that we're keen to see in this. With that, I'll pass it to my other counterparts in New Mexico. I believe City of Albuquerque is up next.
Good morning, everyone. I'm actually going to start with turning it over to Sean O'Neill, my counterpart in our Parks and Recreation Department, and then I'll introduce myself.
Yes, I think my video is not working. But yeah, my name is Sean O'Neill. I'm the city forester for the City of Albuquerque. Yes, we're kind of an observing city for the Four Corners initiative, and we're really excited to see the more of the focus on liability biomass. We kind of have a two-prong approach of how to better reuse our biomass. So just in the city's park system, we have like 317 parks that produces a decent amount of biomass that we try to do stuff with, and when we can't, it just gets thrown away. So it's a really big loss that we have in trying to reuse that material that benefits our green space, as well as a large riparian forest that runs right through the center of the city that has been accumulating some decent amount of fuel load. I think the majority of our interactions there are over catastrophic fuel load, and we've dodged some bullets of fires that have broken out in the bosque have been contained pretty rapidly. Last big one was in 2003, and then one a couple of years ago. So kind of being able to focus on, as we move material out of that forest, a lot of it has to be hand done. We can't really pile and burn in the bosque, and riparian forest doesn't really tolerate that well. So a lot of it is moving that material to a new place, and then it stacks up and lives there forever. So we're looking into how can we better use that material and kind of keep the momentum going of reducing our fuel load in a way that benefits the rest of our green spaces. And that's kind of within our open space division, and our wildlife urban interface kind of more goes into our surrounding county. But I'll let Sandra speak some more.
Thank you very much, Sean. So I'm Sandra West in the Sustainability Office, and approaching the city from like more of the going from parks to scaling up, our greenhouse gas goals and our climate action plan both align with this initiative. And with our climate having basically the same, resonating the wildfire, the air quality, like these things you've heard from these other cities, we too are taking a multifaceted approach to creating a resilient future for our residents. We're excited to be, this is the first time that we're on board. We're excited to observe and see what comes out of this. I don't have anything to add to the other requests and things people are excited about that you've already heard. But with that, I'd just like to say I'm really glad that we're in collaboration to create innovative solutions and to really push forward with carbon reduction and addressing liability biomass. Thank you.
Great. And then Brian, are you still on?
I am. Hi, everybody. Very happy to be here. My name is Brian Bonanno. I am the new sustainability coordinator for Bernalillo County. There's probably not a whole lot more I can add to kind of what Sandra was just saying. Kind of, we have some of the similar issues as the city, as we're in the same area. The county does, take up a much wider area, and we have we're actually responsible for, I think, roughly 2,000 acres of cropland, grassland, and forest land. I think roughly about 800 acres of forest land specifically. And the reason we're interested in this this program or this project is because those assets are responsible for, I think, roughly 20% of our, or a 20% decrease in our carbon emissions as a county as a whole. And so we are really interested in protecting those and expanding those assets as much as possible. So we're kind of really looking to looking into biochar as a soil amendment, as I'm also really interested in water and stormwater retention, since we have some divisions that are looking at some new approaches to stormwater management, that this could be kind of incorporated into. I initially got involved in the Four Corners initiative just this last summer. I think when I got invited to a carbon cement webinar. So we initially were looking into kind of approaches that we could get involved with that, or get local concrete block manufacturers kind of to emulate what was going on in Flagstaff. That's not happening yet, but we're still interested. But I think that if we can get some of our land management and open space divisions here at the county involved in this, I think it would be a really great benefit for the county and for the city. So yeah, very excited to be a part of the coalition as an observing member, and yeah, looking forward to all the great ideas that everybody can share and work on. So thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody. If you're watching this, you're seeing that we've got a lot of we've got local communities and the representatives from sustainability offices, from parks, from forestry. One thing to consider here is if you're thinking about a project and recommending a project, is that we may be able to help with some introductions and a little bit of matchmaking. And if you're hearing something where perhaps something in the Bosque that Sean was talking about, and you're like, I might have a solution for that, but you need to know a little bit more, get in touch with us, and we can help facilitate some of those introductions so that you might be able to kind of get to a point of being ready to submit a proposal. So with that, I will move next to the next steps, timelines, and some resources. Chris, get ready with those links to drop. But this is kind of the playbook that we have for developing a campaign and a campaign timeline. So these things in orange, we've already done. We've been doing engagement and education in the communities with the leaders. We've formed that partnership, and we've kind of selected this theme, this liability biomass theme. We've been doing some scoping and some due diligence, and we're kind of like 90% there. And so we're at this moment now where we're doing the opportunity notice. As mentioned, we want your help to finish the final 10%. And so it is early November, and we're going to have kind of this 2-ish month period where we want to hear from you. We want to know what it is that you're needing clarification on. Are there some comments? What do you have to sort of offer to us as we figure out how we're going to sort of like put final pen to paper in terms of creating the application? Because once the application formally goes out, projects are going to have to fit the box. But we expect that sort of formal request for applications is likely to happen in early 2024. We'll hold that application sort of period open for likely 6 to 8 weeks, at which point we'll close the application period and we will begin to review the proposals. When we review proposals, we kind of go through 2 tiers of proposal review. We actually work with carbon removal experts in the field that are able to sort of evaluate the project on a number of criteria that I will unpack here in just a moment. But they're technical experts, right? So we want them to be able to kind of give a sense to the community reviewers what it is that they're seeing in this project proposal. And after it goes through the technical review panel, we then present the proposals to the communities. Probably everyone here that you've seen today is going to be on that review committee. And they don't necessarily have to go with exactly what the technical experts said. Part of what we're looking to do is have them be able to apply their lens. And maybe there was, something that rated really high on carbon removal quality, but there's a co-benefit for the one that's, ranked number 3 by the technical experts that the communities have just fallen in love with. And that's the one that they, end up ranking higher. So 2 layers of review will ultimately decide which ones to go with. Winners will be announced sometime in the spring. And then we'll work on that campaign showcase and the multiplier campaigns and figuring out how to get these projects on the ground and the impact expanded. Evaluation criteria. We know people are interested in this, and we actually worked with Carbon Direct to write a playbook on it. So I believe Chris will be dropping the link here in a moment if he hasn't already. But these are our review category. There's the how much carbon removal is happening. So that's kind of the quantity piece. What's the quality of that carbon removal? And the sort of quality metrics are unpacked a little bit more in this playbook as well. We're interested in the innovation, scalability, and future impact, right? Maybe the project doesn't achieve like a huge amount of carbon removal from a quantity standpoint, but if it's something that's inherently replicable, that could be done in multiple communities, it's something that we can showcase and say, here's a model, that could be something that we're really interested in, because that's ultimately sort of that thesis again. We need many deployments. We need more participation and support. So if what you're showing us is something that would be inherently replicable, we would be very excited about that. Co-benefits is certainly an important piece of this as well as the team and resources. So a little bit of the have you done this before? Who are you bringing to the table? How confident can we be that this project is actually going to do what you say it's going to do? You'll see in this playbook that we actually have sort of the percentages of how much each one of these was weighted for our initial concrete campaign. Those percentages may be dialed up and down, but we still have to have those conversations with the local communities. But I would say that the innovation and scalability, that was the highest percentage weighting in our last campaign, but all of them will have some impact. And these are the criteria, so you can see them in advance and plan for them. Another important piece to emphasize is that we are looking for projects that are going to start having impact within a year. We want them to have to be meaningfully complete or to be in operation. And if you're thinking about some CapEx heavy project that's going to take 2 or more years before it's going to be meaningfully producing biomass, that's probably going to be outside the scope of these grants. So we're kind of looking for something that's more or less shovel ready, ready to go, and on this 1 year time frame is going to be having impact. We are also dropping an application template, so it is going to be the exact application that we utilize for the carbon removal and concrete campaign. You can expect that the application for this liability biomass campaign is going to look quite similar. There's going to be a necessary sort of tweaking and adjustment of fields to be able to speak to liability biomass sort of concerns rather than concrete concerns. And we may be adding, a few more questions, maybe remove a question or two. But again, this is kind of like 90% there. You can expect that it's going to look an awful lot like this when we launch in 2024. So just wanting to, again, sort of show our work, provide the homework, and allow you all to kind of plan and get ready for submitting a proposal in the future. And then this is the part where we're interested in opening and engaging in dialogue with you all. So we've got a Google form. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what your sort of general company and carbon removal solution is, and also what your needs and gaps are. So we've been talking about this idea of catalytic grant funding, but we know that a lot of projects, the reason, the barriers they run into aren't necessarily financial in nature. Maybe there are other things, and we've got 6 communities that are involved in this campaign. If you're able to articulate what is it that is making it difficult for you to be able to sort of deploy or actualize your project, we might be able to find ways to be able to support that project by helping to address some of those other barriers. So we're excited to hear not only how much funding do you anticipate potentially needing to be, what is that sort of like catalytic gap that you're experiencing, but if there are other sort of dimensions that are needs and gaps or barriers, we want to hear about those. Also on that form, if you're not a CDR supplier, but you're listening to this and you're like, I am interested in this, and I have some assets that I might be able to offer in order to support this type of work. If you've got biomass on your land that you would be interested in, also collaborating with CDR suppliers. If you have land that you would be interested in putting under a conservation easement, things like that. It doesn't even necessarily have to be land related, but if you're in one of these communities and you're hearing about this, let us know. We'd be excited to be able to help that. That kind of speaks to that needs and gaps thing that I just mentioned, that some of these suppliers, they're looking for something that's not even just the catalytic grant funding. And if we're able to help play matchmaker a little bit, that would be something that we would be excited to do in these next couple of months. And then the questions, clarifications, and comments, there's a specific section in the form where we just say, what are your questions? What do you need clarified? What are your comments? In this section in particular, anything that you put in there, we will respond to, but we will also publish on the Four Corners website so that others can also see the answers to those. So keep that in mind as you're crafting those questions. But we recognize that, if you've got a question or need a clarification, perhaps somebody else has that same question or same clarification, and we want to be able to communicate out and clarify for everybody what's going on. So submissions of this form are due December 8th, and then we'll spend 2 weeks kind of putting our nose to the grindstone, making sure we answer all of those questions and that we publish them before Christmas in December. And with that, I'm going to begin wrapping this up. So if there are questions, it seems like there's quite a few things happening in the chat. We could potentially explore some of those. Chris, I don't know if you've been sort of keeping track and are able to pull some thematic ones out. Certainly, we'd be happy to continue to have this conversation, both with that Google form as well as, if appropriate, by email. This is my email. Chris Neidl is also the chair of the board, and I work closely with, but you can get in touch with me. We'd love to hear from you on the Google form, and I will, turn it over to Chris, since he's been sort of overseeing and managing what's happening in the chats.
Yeah, I would just say that these are great questions. We got a couple from Jimmy Voorhees and also from Mari Simbana. What I would recommend is to add those to the form, but we can say, I think some of these questions were answered in the course of the discussion. Jimmy, asked a great question, I think, right before we heard from our partners about, what kind of problems are they actually facing. And so at a certain high level, those were addressed. With the question around, what scale of utilization, that's a great question. So Jimmy, I would recommend just pop that into the form, and we might even be able to turn that one around for you a little bit faster. It's a great question. Are there counterfactuals? Also, counterfactuals are really important for bio-based CDR. What's happening with your LB already? Yeah, that sounds like that might be an extensive answer required to that. So Jimmy, again, do include that in the form. Mara, you had asked about examples of government agencies nationally, if you mean on the federal government that have implemented measures and practices that we can refer to. There's actually quite a bit out there that both more related to the liability biomass management, but at the same time, there are things that are happening at the federal government, related to CDR forms that are related within the scope of this. So we can definitely provide some links that might be helpful. If you're referring to local governments or states, I mean, you're looking at them. I think that the Four Corners really is the premier organization that is really putting local CDR leadership on the map. I think that that's not an exaggeration to say that. And the experience that Boulder and Flagstaff, in particular locally, individually have had, and as well as with as members of Four Corners, have learned an enormous amount. And there's actually quite a bit in that playbook that you can actually go ahead and take a look at, which I think you'll find very helpful in terms of what's the sort of the logic and the rationale and the experiences and lessons learned that we've gained so far. We've also realized through this, very excitingly, there's a lot of latent interest or already stated interest among local governments all over the country, from coast to coast, that are at an earlier stage, that we hope will become formal members of the Four Corners Carbon Coalition in time. So again, elaborate on that question of what your specific needs are in the form, and we will provide you with some specific resources and feedback. But those are great questions. Ramón, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. I think I may be wrapping up then, if we're going to handle most of the answers to questions by pointing people to the form. We'll try to also provide answers to them before that December 22nd. And that's just kind of like our deadline to publishing them. But if you've got some questions, we will aim to make sure that we're engaging in dialogue as soon as possible. So it's not going to be, silence from us until December 22nd. So
one other thing I'll just add, which I did put in the chat there, but I will edit this video this evening, and we will send out an email on Monday to all folks who RSVP'd and attended. And that will also include the links that were included. If you were not able to grab those links in the chat, they will be included there. So don't stress it if you haven't been able to do that, or for any reason can't. You'll receive all of that on Monday.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Thank you to all of the cities that are participating, that joined us this morning. We're really excited about this campaign, really excited to see what projects come in. Again, let us know what you're thinking. Let us know, help us get that final 10%. We're 90% of the way there. And if there are things that we can do in these next couple of months to help, put some of the pieces together to be able to help a project go forward. Like I said, not even just the catalytic grant funding, but addressing some of the other needs and barriers. Then we were very excited to put in some sweat equity to try to help figure some of that out and make introductions. So I think we'll wrap it up there, and just a great appreciation to everybody.